Hello, 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 and welcome to Getting Real with Paula. My name is Paula Alphonse, and tonight we are officially integrating business component to our programming. And this is to assist anyone and everyone who is interested about entrepreneurship. Right now, in light of the pandemic, quite a few people, individuals as well as businesses, have had to pivot or reinvent themselves in order to keep food on the table. The pandemic also brought a steep learning curve for anyone having to reassess what the next steps are in this virtual context that we are currently operating under. Which brings us to a renewed interest for podcasting as a vehicle to get your message out. So tonight, we are talking about the do's and the don't of podcasting with Sherley Joseph, a podcaster herself. So without further ado, let's start our conversation and dive into the world of podcasting. Good evening, Sherley. So glad to have you here.
Hello, Paula. It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
For those people who don't know us or me, I would say us for this conversation. Could you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, and how long have you been podcasting? And what brought you to entrepreneurship? So many elements to that question.
Yes. Rule number one of the worst thing I'm doing as a podcaster, I have gum in my mouth. Don't do that. Don't do that. So my story, so I started podcasting in 2010. I've always had a fascination for, I was raised on television, really. Television raised me. I was always fascinated with broadcasting, like radio and television broadcasting was something I was always loved. And I've said this story in so many ways, but when I was a kid, when my friends were playing with Barbie dolls, I would pretend to be a radio disc jockey or an investigative reporter. I would take the tape that my parents had that they would send back to the Caribbean. Remember when back in the days your parents would tape a message to send it to people back home?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would take that tape recorder, I'd sneak it. And I remember my parents like, "Where's the tape recorder?" I made sure not to do it on Sunday because Sundays was their time to record for the family so that they can send it off through Canada Post or whatever on Monday. And I would just hide the recorder in the kitchen because that's where all the adults hang out. That's where they would be there all day having conversations. My parents would always talk about their plans or what's going on in their lives, or even when they had friends come over, it was always in the kitchen. So I'd like sneak my the recorder under the table and hear what and tape what was going on.
Yes, investigator, right?
Oh yeah, completely, and then as I grew, I'd be doing this like what 7, 8 years old, and I was the kid who I still love gadgets, and so when my parents had their first microwave, and I'm showing my age, they brought the first microwave at home. I'd be the one who would set it up for them at like 9, 10 years old. I'd set up the stereo in the house, anything electronic. They would be like, "Here, Shirley, figure it out," and I would just dive in and figure it out, and it would take me sometimes like a whole weekend or a whole Saturday, but I loved it. I loved that aspect of just figuring it out, looking at the little booklet, and yeah, and then I would force my brother to be my radio DJ, poor guy, whenever I had that little tape.
What's their point of having brothers if not for that?
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, be my co-host. Hello, this is for like you might use this in the future. you know, this skill and my poor brother. I'm still trying to get him to do a podcast or something with me till this day.
And he's
uh,
like, no, I'm not playing with you, Shirley.
Well, yeah, we're, it's like, I think we're thinking of something right now. We're brewing something. It's just a matter of, coming together and timing and life. But yeah, like I just loved, watching people like Dan Rathers and Christina Amanpour and that style of like how they get in like people's like direct questions, like, well, didn't you do this? And I just love that style of communication. Like, yes, get to the truth, Dan. and and then
Oh, this is too funny. Yes.
and then one day, like I remember going to, being a latchkey kid, coming home 4 o'clock or so, just before four, and discovering a woman named Oprah. And I thought, oh my gosh, here's this woman. Like there's two people actually. It's funny because someone was saying like, we tend to mention people who are American. But I remember like someone, even me again, my broadcaster nerd self. I remember people like Marcy Ian too. Like she was a huge influence. Like when I saw her, and I was like, oh, look, there's someone who looks like me. Like that's actually doing it. And I remember
Mhm.
seeing her in my youth and thinking, oh my God, this is so dope. Like she's actually doing it. And I just knew seeing her was a moment. I knew like I not only it was so cool to see someone that looked like me, but at the same time I felt the weight that she was carrying as well. I could just you could just feel it. And I thought how amazing and bold for her to keep going in order to make opportunities and create and crack the door open for many, many broadcasters, let alone Black, female, Canadian broadcasters to have a chance. And then people like Oprah just kind of shifted my brain on how to connect with people. I just love her style of communication, and so I decided to, when I'm graduate high school, I'm going to take some kind of broadcasting. Like I winded up applying and getting into at Humber College for radio broadcasting. And this was around the time where there was a shift of going from analog to digital. And so they were trying to, the year that I went, honestly, they were trying to figure out that shift. And it was I could tell the program was having a difficulty of like, how much analog should we teach them and how much digital should we teach them? And this was around the time when I was at Humber, where there were talks that Howard Stern might get picked up in Toronto, like in one of the radio station was going to have syndicate Howard Stern. And I just really, I know like his content at the time was, very dude bro, like, you know what I mean? But
He was never my favorite, I'll be honest.
I know. But my favorite parts about the show, I really didn't listen to the rest of the show. I only listened really to Howard Stern's when he had a guest on. And if you don't mind the whole brouhaha and hot mess that sandwich in between the show, and you really pay attention to his style, I really, really love, and I still do. I think that element that he had a little bit was there, but now it's there more than ever now. Like I feel like he doesn't have, he's older now, he's wiser now, and I just love the Howard Stern today and his style of communication. I just love how he infuses his questions based on what he thinks is the experience of the guest, and I just like, so that's, those are like my inspiration, people like, I'm all of those four people. I'm, like Dan Rather, Christina Amanpour, Howard Stern, and the
Oprah.
Queen, Oprah. I just,
Which are all big shoes to walk into.
yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't go into broadcasting. You went towards podcasting
I
first.
I
Or did you do
did.
broadcasting?
So in the middle of learning radio broadcasting, I was really intimidated. I'm not gonna lie. There was the pool of talent. Like I went the same year as people like, one of the hosts of Tim and Sid and people like George Strombo. And I was really intimidated by the talent. And I started thinking, I don't know if I want to be in front of the microphone. And so by the second year, you choose like what area of radio that you want to go to. If it's sales, if it's talent, like in front of the mic, news, production. And my gadget girl self went into the production side and realized like, oh shoot, I have a knack for it. Like
Mm.
it was natural, and really enjoyed that aspect. And life kicked in. My hubby was in college learning animation, 3D animation, and then he had opportunity to move to Montreal. And at the same time, like I was expecting, our first child, and so I really had to think, what do I do? I wasn't willing to, I don't know, I think it's still the same today, that you have to sacrifice if you want to get into radio,
Hmm.
to move in like a small little town in Thunder Bay and then move your way back to the big cities, whether if you want to, like basically put in your hours, right? Like a
Hmm.
pilot, like put in your
Hmm.
hours and broadcast out there in a small little town in order to hopefully get back to the Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal market, or Ottawa even. And so I wasn't really willing to do that. Um, and so life kicked in. Now, fast forward maybe, oh gosh, 6 years later, around 2007, 2008, at my work there was a contest, and I won an iPod Nano. And that iPod Nano changed my whole entire life. As I was trying, figure out how to use it, I saw this thing called podcast, and I clicked on it, and it just, everything changed. I discovered these amazing shows and conversation, and it broke the rules of radio broadcasting, where you could say whatever you want, you could say what you think, which is huge, because in broadcast you have to remain neutral.
Yes.
No, yeah. Um so I love that. I love the aspect of, oh, I could share my opinion. And there was a show that I still love till this day. And I always tell people, like, if there was ever a history book about podcasting, these two people have to be in, like, it just have to. It's a show called Keith and the Girl. And they were so different from all the other podcasts, because all the podcasts at the time had no structure. It was just people turning on the microphone and say whatever they wanted.
Wanted.
They were kind of the same too, but they had a structure behind it too. Like in terms of, you knew listening to their show that he was a comedian and she was a performer at the time. And so at the time, they utilized their show in order to put a name into the type of things that they're into, which is comedy for him and her
Mhm.
performance side. And then they figured this using podcasting as a platform to spotlight comedians because they live in New York. And so, putting that aspect of inviting local comedians on the show, and they would talk about, like, it was a journal as well, their show. Like, they would talk about their relationship, they would talk about
Yeah.
all sorts of things, whatever that they thought of the current events that's happening. And that just blew my mind that, oh, you could do that. You don't have to not only turn on the mic and just rant, but you could share your opinion, but most
Mhm.
importantly, share yourself. And something about that was really, really appealing to, Clove and I. Like
Mhm.
we listened to podcasting for 2 years. And finally, when we were thinking about our show, Chonilla, at the time we wanted to create a blog as an interracial couple because when we go, when we put the kids at night to bed, we would talk about, you know, experiences. Like we'd be in situations and how we'd be in the same situation, but see it completely
Completely
different.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, he would experience and see it in a way as a male and a white male, and me as a female and as a black female, and so we would talk about like how, well, that's not how I saw it, and
And it, yeah.
or he would be like, I don't get it,
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
or how the world would treat us or react to us. We would just communicate these things and talk about religion and politics. And racism was the biggest that really got us thinking of at first creating a blog about our thoughts, because we were thinking, are there other interracial couple like us that disagrees with this notion of um I don't see color. That was one of the biggest thing. Like we were never about that,
Hmm.
and we'd have these kind of conversation, like in terms of privilege or in terms of just everything related
Hmm.
to racism and bigotry and toxic masculinity and politics and religion and our
Which is
kids and parenting.
everything.
It's just everything. And so we're like, okay, let's do a blog. And then we realized I'm not a writer. And we remembered what Keith and the girl was doing. And I was like, you know what? Let's start a podcast. Let's just do it. And so we did it. It was nerve wracking. The first year, you could hear how nervous we were. But it's funny because but I studied the hell out of them. I studied
Hmm.
not just, what I did was, and I think it's because of my radio broadcasting mindset. It's so weird now to see all these articles about like podcasting 101 and da 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 da. And I took that for granted. I never even thought of these steps. I just kind of did it. And that's because of my radio broadcasting background.
Hmm.
Of I knew when we started that we really had to have a clear idea of who our listeners were. Like what do they how do they like who is our target here? Like who are we speaking
You are
to?
starting to drop a few gems here.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Like,
I can hear that.
well, I mean, we started with this biggest question for our show was, are there other interracial couples or other people who thinks like us? That was the biggest foundation of our show. Like, are there people who communicates and thinks the way that we do? And then we started breaking it down like, okay, what do they look like? And we used us as like as
Mhm.
our, and I'm going to
Example.
go into this, but like as our listener avatar. We used
Hmm.
us like, okay, we're an interracial couple. What are we into? We love movies, we love TV, television shows, movies. We love, like, that's one thing. If you don't if you can't talk about racism, this is not the house. You're going to be super
It's like,
uncomfortable.
okay, okay, we're gonna leave now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Like we love talking about like that stuff because we were, I guess, subconsciously decolonizing ourselves,
Hmm.
and that's why we were having these conversation. Um, and so we just knew like, okay, these are the areas that we love to talk about. This is, how old are we? Who's the like, we just knew like, okay, what is our age? What do we do? What are we into? And lo and behold, again, because of my broadcasting, that's exactly who we attracted,
Yeah.
these kind of
And
exact
it's,
listeners.
from what I understand, whether it's this podcasting or we're talking broadcasting, the idea is if you don't know who you're talking to, you don't know how to reach those people. So it's the sense where it's funny to think that who I am will attract who looks like me or think like me or has some of those perspectives as well, because some other people might come on one day but they're like, yeah, nah, not my kind, while the people who actually can connect will become uh how can I say not a different larger version of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. And having having that clarity of who your listener avatar looks like when you're speaking, you can visualize their faces. You can actually create of like, yes, like when Clove and I would do Chonilla, yeah, of course I'm looking at Clove and I see him, he looks at me and he sees me. But I could tell too at the same time we're also thinking about what are the other people that kind of looks like us or
Mm-hmm.
think like us look like, so it's weird, it's like very subconscious that some days my listener avatar on a specific subject, it's so weird, I'm saying this like this is the first time I'm actually saying this, but like yeah, like if I know, like for example, if I would talk about like what was going on with Megan
Harry,
and Harry. Yeah, because he ain't no
we're
parents no more.
talking about them as if they're just,
Right.
no,
If I'm talking about
that
Megan
couple,
and
2 doors
Harry,
down.
right. And it's like my mind is like if there was a message that I'm trying to convey to, let's say, I want someone to understand the plight of this interracial couple and what they're going through. And I start thinking about like, okay, well, what does my listener avatar look like? And what am I about to say? And if that's
Mhm.
trying to communicate, like, look, uh, this is a moment where Harry realized that he was privileged and in a bubble. And so my mind goes into, okay, who's my target here? A white male, 40 something, doing this kind of work where he's making a lot of money. And my brain just goes into seeing that visually,
Yeah.
that I will use words and my messaging and my tone starts changing to really laser target that person. Because
Mhm.
I'm like, I need you to understand about your
This
privilege
bit of the
in this
information is
situation.
about you. So
Yeah,
pick it up. That's for you specifically.
yeah. And so yeah, so even like, it's great when I hear people say like they're doing a show because yes, the show really is about you, right? Like
Mhm.
it's about what you enjoy
You
talking
cannot not
about.
share.
Exactly. But being mindful of who you're speaking to is
Mhm.
it really helps you target um laser target your audience as well. Really, it changes the tone of how you're speaking, you know?
I find it interesting because you're speaking not only as a podcaster, but also as a podcast producer,
Yeah.
because you've done both, and it's like sitting on the two chairs. I see what it is that I want to pass as a message, but also look from the other side, would that be what they want to hear about this, or would what they need to hear, because it's not always about what you want, but it's also what you need, because when we're changing perspective, it is not an issue of, oh yeah, we were talking about this and I just wondering. It's just like, no, 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 you. And the podcast is like you're not pointing fingers, but at the same time, because it's laser target, the people who are meant to hear it, unless they turn it off,
Right.
they're gonna get it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it's okay. Sometimes you communicate. It's not going to be appealing for everyone, right? But again, having that clear idea of who you're speaking to is huge because that creates a glue, right? It creates
Yes,
this
in the
this
message.
exactly. Your
Hmm.
audience becomes a glue. They'll if even if you take a moment of pause, they'll be there for you because you are very clear of who you're speaking with
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
So let me get to that 101, podcasting 101.
Yes.
What are some of the insight that you can share so that those newbies who are considering or debating, should I not, could that work for me or not, because nowadays virtual is everything, so podcasting fits nicely in that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest thing I say to new podcasters is even before thinking of getting that mic is again, it goes back to being very clear on who are you, what is your show about?
Mhm.
You know, what are, take the time to listen. One of the biggest mistake, oh my gosh, that with new podcasters or people who are like, I want to start a podcast is they are not taking the time to listen to other podcasts. And so that's, I find super important. Like it's your craft. Like if you're going to get into anything, it's like, like no one's going to be a chef or like if you're going to own a restaurant, like you have to know a little bit about cooking. You have to taste the food and how many times that restaurants have failed because some person has a lot of money and they hire, sure, the right people, but how do you do any type form of quality control if you're not taking the time of
Yeah.
actually tasting the food and really knowing what is the experience of
Mhm.
the patrons that comes to your restaurant? It's the same thing about the podcast, you know. Yes, it is about you, but also taking that time to think about what's my goal here in terms of creating my podcast, you
Mhm.
know, and not just turning on the mic because, oh, me and my friend, we really get along and we laugh all the time. So I figured if we laugh, other people are going to laugh too.
Of
Mm,
course, no, maybe.
maybe,
Unless
yeah,
you're drunk.
right. It's like everyone does that. And I feel bad sometimes when I've had these one-on-one consultation with folks, but and I could hear like the shock, a pause, because it's like you have to take that moment to really think about who you're speaking with and envision not only who you're speaking with, but also have a goal of what's the goal of your podcast. Is it to inspire? Is it to educate? Is it to convince? Some
Mhm.
podcast it's all about that, right? And especially if it's a podcast that's for entrepreneurs where it's like I'm going to educate and at the end I'm going to convince them to take
Something.
a lesson or check out my workshop or something like that, right? So, yeah, so are you going to entertain, inspire, educate or convince? And by having those thoughts of knowing the identity of your audience that you're targeting, you know, and you have to really like bog down to age, location, what's their interests, what's the perspective, like for Chonilla, Clove and I are we're kind of sarcastic. We use comedy to talk about the hardest
Yeah.
things, you know.
Which
We
is which is a good way of opening people's eyes,
mhm,
because when you go straight to it, they might be more resistant, but
right.
the comedy makes them start laughing and then, huh.
Right.
It's
I
like,
never thought of
oh,
it that way. Right. you know like yeah, like a perfect example, I had a conversation with Clove about, I wanted to talk about, not everyone can afford food, right? And the food shortages and how in
mhm,
our society, it's unbelievable in Canada. There are people who have to think about their next meal. But I led that to that serious, I didn't start off saying that right away. I start the conversation by saying, oh, when I went to the groceries, I noticed this person bought a nail, an apple, and milk. I wonder what they're gonna make with that. Like,
Mhm.
what?
Mhm.
Like, what's gonna what? Why the nail though? You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like, so it's like I try to. We always, I don't know. It's kind of
It's
subconscious how
finding your angle and how you're gonna, because
to
there's
get.
this part where you want to trigger a bit of interest, but it's like you saw something and the same way it triggered a question. What are you gonna make with that?
Yeah,
You're thinking other people might just think the same unless you already know that recipe.
right. And then it leads to a conversation
Mhm.
about like, well, it's not right that we live in a society where people are hungry, and especially if you live in any of the G8 or
Yeah,
G20 countries.
yeah.
So being very like every single show, I'm prepare your show. We have show notes. Like I have a show notes. If y'all saw my Clover, like our show notes is not a joke. Like,
And,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it's funny because a lot of people see you on the outside and they say, "Oh, they're just shooting the breeze," and there's a path, there's that structure you were talking earlier about.
There's a path because you need to have a it's like you have to have a guide in your
Mhm.
show, right? Because if you don't have a guide, then you're going to be all over the place and it's just not interesting anymore for your listener, right? So having a clear idea of your target audience, what are their perspective, what is like, are they sarcastic, are they funny, are they introverts, are they extrovert? Like Chonilla is a much more extroverted type of show, but Black Canadian Content Creators Podcast is a little bit more introvert because my idea is like I pull it back. I don't put too much like wildness like Chonilla because it's not about me. The my I knew the goal of my show for Becan CC's podcast
Mhm.
is to spotlight Black creators. So even my tone, and I'm kind of more like ASMR chill, and it's really about like asking questions that I can relate with the person. And I my mindset, my goal is how do I make this person shine? You know? And so having that target, that goal for that show, it helps me structure my
Mhm.
questions and it
Mhm.
helps me structure the whole entire show and where things goes. It's just about like, because anyone can banter. I could call my friends for that, but if I'm going to spend an hour, 20, 30 minutes or even an hour dedicated while I'm you know, driving to work or running my errands or doing my dishes, if I'm going to dedicate my time, you better like help me inspire, you better entertain
Mhm.
me, you better educate me, or you better, convince me of
Mhm.
something that I needed to know to make change. So that's super important because nothing, as a podcast producer, when I the amount of time I've heard people like, "Oh, we're two people and we laugh and I think other people are going to enjoy our conversation." Um it's not enough. I feel like, yeah, but I can do that with my friend, you know?
And it's interesting what you say because you're talking as if you already assessed that the people in the room would be people who want to hear about you. But your friends might want to hear about you. But until you bring those in so that they want to be your friend, you have to figure out something to catch them.
I use this example a lot and it kind of clicks in when I have these one-on-one is when, okay, when you think of Michael Jackson,
Hmm.
right? What comes to mind about him? Like what is that thing that you expect out of him?
Okay.
Like what, like Paula, I'm asking you like what do you think of Michael Jackson? Like what's the thing? I don't well, are you first of all, are you into Michael Jackson? Do you
Okay,
like
I
his
know Michael
music?
Jackson. I know his music, and let's just say for me, it was music and dancing, and the videos were to die for.
Yeah.
The person itself know very little about him.
Right.
never done any research about him because to me, what triggered interest for me was about his music and the way he had to bring people to the dance floor.
Yeah, like his artistry, like
Oh,
there's an expectation,
oh
right?
yeah.
Like
So
I
a
expect,
boring video? Oh
right? Like
no. What
if
you
Mike,
mean?
if
And there
Mike,
was structure in all his stuff. Woo!
right? Like Michael's gonna give me a little story. I expect him to give me that like a little moonwalk or a little dance, and if he doesn't give me those things, I'm not interested. Like it's not that I wouldn't be interested, but
You know something's
I
missing.
yeah, like I'm like I'd be like, what's wrong, Michael? Like, where's the
I'm still on
dancing?
the edge. I'm waiting
Right,
for something.
right. And the one thing that I always feel, there's a sense of comfort because as human beings, we need predictability, right? We need structure. It's just our brain
Yeah.
is wired that way. So for me, if I don't get a hee hee from Michael, there's a problem. I'd be like, what is up, Michael? Oh,
What's
Michael's going
up
through
with
some
you?
changes.
You? Are you okay? Yeah.
Are you Michael, are you okay? Like where is my hee hee? So so it's like I say that because it's like if I'm gonna watch James Corden, you know, and I don't see, maybe I might not see it for a while, but I expect to sometimes here and there for him to give me carpool karaoke. That's what
Okay.
I love from him. So that's what I tell people when you're thinking about when you structure your podcast, like what's that thing? And that's what separates everyone. And when people are like, when I
Yeah.
started in 2010, there was like 250,000 podcasts in the entire world. I actually, it was a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're almost about to hit 1 million podcasts in the
Mm.
world. And so yes, is it getting, it's we're not quite saturated, but we're about to hit it. And I always tell people, if you're going to go into podcasting, give me like, what is the thing that is going to separate you from everyone,
Yeah.
right? So you turning on the mic talking to your friend about
Mm.
bantering on current events or pop culture is not enough.
Yeah.
Because again, don't do something that I can do with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a reason to tune into you. You could have the greatest personality. That's wonderful. But there's a way that I expect you, Paula, that you have a way of speaking and communicating that I expect out of you, that brings me comfort. I expect you you know, to get real with me, and that's what and 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 you do that with your audience, like not just for you do that for your audience, right? Like you're just the title alone saying getting real with Paula, I expect that out of you. I expect that you get real because as an audience who's going to watch you, I expect you to bring that out of the person you're speaking to, your guest, because then you're giving me permission to get real as well. But you see how, like, you have to take that time to think about these
and and
things.
and I love the way you're talking about this because there are, as you say, things people don't think about, which is ahead of, but there's also all of those must-have behavior for successful podcasting journey because there are things you have to do so that people would say, "Oh, I want to come back. I want to hear more." And how do I get those people to
Yeah.
want to be part of the journey?
Yeah, another tip too I say to new podcasters is be realistic of your time. I'm still learning this. I'm not perfect.
Mm.
Because as a content creator, whether you podcast, you're a blogger, and anything you do, especially as a creative, consistency is king. It really
Yeah.
is. And so, and I'm still honestly learning this. I'm going to admit that. But being realistic too of your time as a creator is very important. I was telling someone the other day that I was watching interview with Eddie Murphy, and somebody told him like, you should start a podcast. And I thought, oh my God, Eddie Murphy started a podcast. I'm all over it, right? But he said, and you could tell that he put the time into researching if that's even possible for him. And he knew himself, and he said, nah, that's a lot of work. He's He's like,
It's like that's not the kind of work I enjoy.
he's
Yeah.
like, that's not, I don't, that's not me. My style is I put in uh, 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 a huge amount of work in a short period of time. That's why he does movies, because he knows that he knows himself, and realistically, like he'd rather do projects that are, maybe 4 6 months, and then he takes the year off, but these projects have to be a big payoff.
Mhm.
And you could tell from his answer, he's like, nah, man, like every week I gotta figure
Yeah,
out what I'm
because
gonna
podcasting is
say.
about consistency. Have to keep showing up.
Right. And then, and so I say too, on the realistic side is, yeah, be realistic of your life. Like that's one of the mistake that we didn't do when we started. Our kids were really young. And so I had to be realistic in terms of, well, how often is this going to be a seasonal show where I do 12 episodes or 6 episodes or 10 episodes? And then I take a break every 3 months between seasons. Oh, merci. Or do I do a weekly show, or do I do a bi-weekly show, monthly show, every 3 weeks show? Regardless of what that
Mhm.
time frame is for you, one of the biggest thing is make sure you communicate that to your audience. Always, always,
Yeah.
always let your audience know what's going on and what's up. That's another thing that I would say too. Don't make the mistake like we did. Don't ever ghost your audience. We did that. Like we with Chonilla, we did it for 5 years straight, and then we took a 4 year hiatus. But we knew ourselves from day one. And what we said to our audience members is, look, because we knew our show is also a personal journal. It's a journal of our lives, and with mixed in with comedy and other things. But we said to our audience that, hey, if you don't see us, we're either life or we're going through it as a couple, And then we'd come back and we'd share like, hey, we were going through it, and here's the lesson that we learned. Like we were both trash last week, because of I we were both too stubborn,
Mhm.
like things like that. But I think our audience always appreciate the fact that we were very honest. And it's funny because when we're not on, I get messages from our fans or from Chonillians, and they'll say like, "Are y'all okay? Is everything all right?" Even when I started Black Canadian Content Creators, the podcast, they're like, "Oh my God, what's going on? Like, is this? Are you not together with Clove anymore?" I'm like, "No, we're still together. It's just,
And that is the testament of what you managed to build, because they were with you in the not in your everyday life, in the relationship, and they were rooting for you. So if
Yeah.
something happens, it's just like, please tell us. There was a dynamic that they wanted to keep seeing happening. So that's, to me, that's creating that rapport with your audience.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
creating
if
rapport is
they
huge.
don't, it's like they won't be loyal.
That's real. Creating rapport is huge, but you create rapport when you have a plan, a goal,
Yeah,
right? If you don't have a if you don't know where you're going, who the hell is going to follow you cuz you don't know where you're going?
yeah,
Right,
it's
so
clear.
it's the same thing as what you create, especially with podcasting, right? So yeah, if you have a direction and a goal, and that's why thinking about these things even before buying that microphone. How many times people bought a microphone, they're like, I got a microphone that's been sitting for years. I'm like, great, okay, what's your show about? Oh, I have no idea. I'll just wing it.
And I find it interesting because nowadays, when you think about the variety of shows that are out there, you actually think you can still wing it and nobody's going to
Right.
notice. The audience is a lot more sophisticated than
Exactly.
we ever thought they were, because we have options. So if it feels as though I don't know what you're trying to do here, it's not working, I'm off. And not only am I off, I'm likely to mention it to other people. Oh, I've listened to the worst blah 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 blah. And then that's how you ended up. I tried, but I never caught on because my message, my goal, my vision for that show wasn't clear.
Yeah, so having a vision, like, even being honest with yourself, and if you're honest in terms of your goal, that's exactly the type of audience you will attract. So if
Yeah.
you're honest of knowing I'm going to identify my podcast goal as to generate leads for my business if you're an
Hmm.
entrepreneur, or to be recognized as a leader in your industry in order for you to be hired as an expert, or to share important messages, or to just simply have fun. But being honest and clear of that
Yeah.
is very super important. And then from there, that's when you could start looking at like, okay, well, what is the format of my show? Is it a conversation? Is it guest oriented show? Is it both? Um, Now there's more flexibility. People are willing, like, you don't have to, you're seeing more of a trend of some podcasts will have in the same feed two different styles of formatting on their show, right? Where one is it's a monologue of their thoughts for 10 minutes, and then it's sandwich in between is the next episode will be them interviewing a guest, but again, it relates to the industry or the niche
Hmm.
of the type of conversations they have on their show. So, yeah, these are all things to think about way before getting that mic.
And
And
to me, that's all about the laser focus. Is about you cannot expect people to get on board if you haven't figured out where you're going.
yeah,
And
and for sure. And another thing too, I say is being sure of the type of mic that you want to get um, for your podcast is super important too. So if you're gonna get a condenser mic, any type of condenser mic, the most popular is the Blue Yeti.
mhm.
I'm not gonna go there with the Blue Yeti yet, but
It's okay. We're not sponsoring any
yeah.
brands.
Um, but if you're gonna have a condenser mic like that, then be very mindful of the room that you're in. And so maybe you might want to consider having your small studio in your bedroom where there's more sheets and things like that, and it could help muffle
Less
the
echo.
less echo, right? Minimize the ambiance of the room. But if you know that you don't really have too much of an area and you live in a very echoey environment, then you might consider a dynamic mic instead because it's much more direct. It doesn't pick up the room much. If you're going to have a show like it, I think that's the popularity of the Blue
Mhm.
Yeti, is that a lot of people got that mic because you can get one mic. You could set it up to Omni or a cardioid or different style of
Mhm.
shifting the mic, where you can have one mic and three people can sit around. So it's
Mhm.
like it's do your research on the type of
Mhm.
mic, and when you're doing your research on the type of mic you want, do it based on where do you think you're going to record
Yeah.
your show. Because if you ever hire a podcast producer or editor, make their job very easy, please. Please.
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. Because it's like being on the internet, but the connection is not good.
Right?
So how can I create magic if you didn't give me something to work with?
Yeah, because and especially if you're going to hire editors, it's like it's a symbiote, like if you don't provide me the cleanest sound, there's only so much that we can do as editors, right? I don't
Definitely.
think, I know for sure, and I've seen and I've watched her, but Beyonce, the pros, like people like Beyonce, that's the reason why they study mic technique. She holds her microphone a certain way. She knows that when she's about to hit those operatic sounds, like in a certain song, she's not going to have her mic here. She's very fully aware
Yeah.
of what she's about to do, because she understands that it's a symbiotic relationship with her tech people, with the
Hmm.
people who are at the board with her when she's live or even recording. So
Yeah.
she understands that if she's going to do these high sounds, she starts pulling that mic away, and understand it's a team effort, right? So
Hmm.
you have to present yourself as well if you are going to hire an editor. Help them by providing them the best quality sound.
Hmm.
Now I understand cost can get in the way, and I understand that. But eventually that is something to think about too. And I think that's the reason, the importance I keep pushing on having a goal, because you're going to realize how many times when I've had people, when they go through the exercise of the goal of their show, it makes them realize, I literally have had conversation with people about this, and they realize, I don't think my co-host is going to be that dedicated as I am after doing this exercise of creating their goal. Or
Mhm.
they say, I don't know if I could do this every week. You know what I mean? So,
It's
um,
the commitment, and
yeah,
it's understanding, because it's meant to be something that you do with a certain level of joy and enthusiasm. If I'm doing it as a chore, guess what? The audience is going to know it.
for sure.
So it's the sense, how do I get it so that it feels like a free flow from me to the audience and not a battle to get to
Right.
them?
Because the thing is, it's like in anything, if you present your art or your podcast or your book and you presented it like it was nothing, I always find, like, when people are like, oh man, you guys make it sound so easy, that I know we've done our job. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I think of people like Jay-Z and the way he raps and makes it easy. I know how difficult and how much work he
Hmm.
had to put in to get to the level that he has
Yeah.
today, right? So
Practice make perfect.
it really truly
Hmm.
is. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Question for you.
Yeah.
What is the hardest lesson that you've had to learn as a mom or as an entrepreneur, or both?
Oh, ooh, that's a good question. The hardest lesson for me has been to really assess who I am. I'm learning
Mm.
as an entrepreneur how much I have to be, oh, being the
Invested?
invested, but also being my best advocate, even
Mm-hmm.
when times are low.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur, really, it's like, if you don't have the right mindset, it's I can understand how you want to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of, it's really like looking at checking your ego at the door.
Yeah.
That's huge. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning even with client, like, I have, I was raised, and one of the biggest thing that I realized, I was on another podcast. Shout out to Tristan. He has an amazing podcast called Story Over Everything. And when I was on his show, I realized one of the biggest reason I've been always fascinated with broadcasting and it's because I grew up where my parents doesn't communicate their feelings. Communication was not
No.
something that we did. Still, they don't do. And I think as a born natural sensitive kid, I needed that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was put in a family that didn't have the tools for that. And I yearned it so much. And I think that's why it kind of brings it back to circle. That's why I would
That's a
record.
chonila.
Yeah, that's why I would put the recorder in the kitchen,
Yeah.
because
I
if
want to know what's going on.
if you ain't talking to me about what's going on, then I'm gonna find out what's going on. you
And
know?
I like what you're saying, because it goes down to the fact that regardless of the environment that I am in, regardless of the experiences that I go through, in the end, it shapes who I am. The
Absolutely.
same way I shape my reality, the same way that reality fine tune what it is that I need to pass on, the mission that I'm meant to accomplish.
Absolutely. And so, as like, I'm a baby entrepreneur. I started this like in 2020 during COVID, and it was really all the hard work of doing this for 10 years just kind of came back, because as people were shifting and really thinking about what they want to do digital, like in their business or in their life or in their brand, they thought of me because people have known I've been doing this for so
Mm-hmm.
long. And so I was inundated with questions about how do I start a podcast and da 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 da. And my husband was like, you can't be continuing to do this for free, girl. Like, you need to make a business out of this,
Yep.
because you have a network to run and you have to put value.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I'm learning too as a mom and as an entrepreneur is finding value, like really standing up in terms of placing value of my time, of my experience, of my knowledge of who I
Mm-hmm.
am. That's been super challenging, to advocate for that. And I want to help people so much, but at the same time, it's that whole I can't
Yep.
I have to put the mask on me first in order to be
Mm-hmm.
able to help others. And so
Definitely.
I can't I had to realize I had to add value to for what I do and have people pay for my time and experience because that's the only way I can help my family. Sure, it
Mm-hmm.
pays the bill, but also I value so much. I love podcasting. I'm a nerd
Mm-hmm.
of it. I listen to it. And so for me, I'm all about, and I say this for any creator and anyone who is going to hire a creator is you paying, like, it's great that you want the hookup and stuff like that, but you have to understand that the people who are artists or content creators or you have to pay them because they put so much time into what they love and they're
Mm-hmm.
passionate about. And
Mm-hmm.
you paying is acknowledging that work, yes, but it's really about how serious are you, because I have shown I'm serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to know if you're serious too.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's why you have to pay. You
and
know,
and
it's
and it's interesting because when you love something you want to talk about it, and oftentimes you get caught in those conversations because you're sharing, and then all
right.
of a sudden you realize, okay, here I go, I gave everything that needed to be said and they haven't paid a cent, and I'm not likely to see anything back coming from it.
That's real because
Mm-hmm.
when the pandemic happened in 2020 in March, around April, I have from April to I'd say August, I had so many calls, so many one-on-ones with people who wanted to start a show, and none of them have started. Not one. Not that I know of so far. That
Mm-hmm.
I did not. But as soon as I placed value and I said, okay, that's it. I gotta get people to
Mm-hmm.
pay for this. That's when I became an entrepreneur. That's when I,
Yep.
I got my first contract and then other opportunities
Mm-hmm.
started coming, right? So placing value for is really important, and that's what creates it really
Credibility.
credibility and opportunity, really.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So be passionate. If you're gonna go into anything, if you're gonna do podcasting, please take the time to listen to other podcasts,
Yeah.
please.
That's at the minimum.
Please, because it breaks my heart when I was
It's
like,
like,
do you
how are
listen
you
to?
going to talk about something you don't know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because and yeah, and that is like a huge key point, because it's like if I'm taking the time to really be putting my time into this and you simply are not listening to other podcasts or you have no interest in it but you want to start a podcast, how it just makes me question how serious are you about doing this. That's one
It's
of them
like it's
anyway.
like selling cars, but you ride a bike everywhere you go.
Right, it's like,
I don't
yeah,
know. I just it doesn't work. Go sell the bikes. It's
yeah.
not. It's gotta be a truer alignment with your values.
Oh yeah, I've had opportunities of actually in I've done sales as well, and I've turned down jobs because I just knew I'm not passionate about it,
Yeah.
and it's just not fair, not only for the person who's going to hire me. It'll be a waste of time for everybody, for the
Yeah.
for the customer, for myself, and for my employer.
Yeah. Comes a point in your journey where you realize money doesn't buy everything.
It really
So
doesn't.
I have to come in
But
with
it's
that
nice though.
sense.
It's nice. I ain't gonna lie, it's nice.
No, we still want to have jobs and opportunities, but you want to do it. You want to do something that you love doing rather than just wake up and say, "Oh no, another day, another dollar." Because to
Yeah.
me, yeah, that's not the way. That's not the best way.
and
to
and
function.
and ever since I've become into my entrepreneurship, journey, it's shifted for me too. Like I've always told my kids, what are you passionate about and what can I do as a parent to help
Hmm.
you find ways to take that passion and earn a living, right?
Yeah.
That was before becoming an entrepreneur. Now I tell them, again, what do you love to do? What is that something that you could do all day and
Okay.
it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like a job? How do you make a business out of it?
Yeah.
you know and that's huge. I wish my parents would have asked me that, but I understand they didn't.
It's another era. It's a sense where we were raised. Remember the way we go through the school system and everything up. It's just you're raised to find and to follow a path that is already defined.
Yeah,
You're not raised to go create something new in this world. It's like, what's wrong with you? Go do something we all know we need or we want.
right,
And
that's
that's
secure. Yeah,
and that's the security sometimes is our biggest challenge. And I look at the whole pandemic, and it's this thing, the routines, the habits we have, the things that we have taken for granted, but our comfort zone that is changing. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't want this. I don't want this. I want to go back. I want to go back. And that's all that creates challenges for people. And
yeah,
whether we're talking podcasting, whether we're talking new job, whether we're talking moving to another city, it's
right.
going somewhere where you don't know how things are going to work, where you're not sure you're going to be good enough, where you're have questions as to the fit, the passion, the interest, and then
Yeah,
happens what happens. But being
yeah,
open minded helps you figure out what faster, what works and what doesn't work
for
for you
sure, for
and not for
sure.
other people, because something might work for everybody else and you come in there and you're thinking, I need to leave, I need to leave, I can't do this. So
Yeah,
finding our own.
yeah, exactly. It's finding our path and what works for us. And that's
Yeah.
why any new parents, I always encourage them like to pay attention to your kid those first 8 years. Look at what they're interested in. Look at
Mhm.
how they play is huge. And I learned that too.
Yes.
That's one question I ask a lot in BCAN CC's podcast. And it's so interesting how having that question, that conversation, and people realizing like, how they used to play as kids
Mhm.
reflects on how
Oh,
what they
what
do.
type of adults they are, but also
Hmm.
the things that still grabs their interest. Oh
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's 102. We're past the hour, girl.
I know, I know. I'm gonna ask you maybe two more questions.
Yeah.
One would be your one key message you want to leave with our listeners about podcasting.
About podcasting, that if you think to yourself, there's so many podcasts, why should I even bother? Because there's so many. I say still go for it because there's only you in this world. There's only one you. And trust me, there are people who are waiting for you,
Yeah.
because your voice is needed out there. And and your perspective gives people permission to grow, to believe in themselves,
To be themselves
to
as
be
well.
themselves, exactly,
Hmm.
and to feel less alone, right?
Hmm.
So don't get inundated by the fact that, I know I mentioned earlier, like, yes, like there's a lot of podcasts out there, that's real, but there's only one you,
Hmm.
and your voice is important to be heard, because
Hmm.
your audience, your your tribe, your community, that the community that you build for your podcast is out there and they're waiting
Hmm.
for you, and the best that thing that you could do for them is just be your truest self.
Yes.
um and that way it liberates them by when you're being your truest self.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
One last question, and I hope you're prepared for that one.
Ooh.
How can people get in contact with you or hear about your other
My other
activities?
things. So you could
Yes.
find me, you could visit the website chonilanetwork.com. That's like chocolate and vanilla. So CHONILLA network.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Sherley Jos, so SHERLEYJOS. So you can find out about the community, such as Black Canadian content creators,
Hmm.
and also my partner, my good friend of mine and co-founder, we have launched a website called POCimages.ca.
Uh,
It
can you say
is
what POC stands for?
it means People of Canada. It is images, People of
Hmm.
Canada images, and it's a stock photography site that we started out of frustration because when we would work with clients in social media strategy and we were trying to find images that are predominantly with Black or Indigenous subjects in Canadian settings, it was very hard for us to find.
Okay.
So we created this space and we're currently looking for beta photographers to work with, to test the system. And it's a great opportunity, especially now with COVID and this
Hmm.
lockdown, as another way to monetize your work, really.
Yeah.
And also to help bring, we're all about featuring Black and Indigenous
Hmm.
photographers, but also changing the perspective of the
Hmm.
stereotypes of Black and Indigenous people. So the
Yeah.
more people can see Black people and Indigenous people in regular settings in Canada,
Mm.
the more it breaks down these stereotypes. I mean,
And the virus. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, even in stock photography, how many times when I even try to look for images of Indigenous people doing regular things, it gets really frustrated to the only stock photography you see in these big companies or these big stock sites that it's Indigenous in their traditional,
Where? Because
wear,
I
and
wear
it's
that every day. Every day.
and it's like, I don't think Indigenous people wear their traditional wear
Traditional.
all
Yeah.
the
Nope.
time, everywhere. Like, come on,
Hmm.
like, you know what I mean? So it's again, it's breaking through the site. We're hoping it breaks these stereotypes. It will help elevate, but also for people to have a different mindset of Black and Indigenous people by presenting them in regular settings.
And I like the part where you say it's people of Canada. It's that reality where we can't just take for granted that you're going to go to the States and have the same imagery, the same realities, because it's not. We're
Right.
not living, we're not facing the same elements, the same obstacle, the same challenges. There's a reality that is truly Canadian, uniquely Canadian. And that's
Exactly.
where we, at least as members of the Canadian Society, how can we ensure that we tell all sides of the story, not
Yeah.
just some side of the
Ex-
story?
exactly. Exactly.
Anyway, it has been a pleasure, and I know we could go on for
A
hours.
long time.
I know you and me both together, not a good match for a 1 hour show.
I know. Poor
But
producer.
thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdoms, sharing some of the projects you're involved in. And hopefully, we will connect with you soon again. And other people will start seeing, huh, maybe I should check that Chanila girl, Shirley Joe. That's why you want to remember on
Yes.
Instagram and go see more of her.
Thank you
It's been
so
a
much,
pleasure.
Paul. Thank you, Paula.